Oh, people are coming on. It must be 7 o'clock. Glad to see all of you. I've already smudged and I have my tobacco, my asema, and I'm ready to go. I'm really honored to be asked to come and speak tonight and tell my story. And I hope that it will have meaning for people and it'll come straight from my heart. So I'm going to go ahead and do my traditional introduction. Buju indinawe maganuk mikwaminsikwe gaye enabiwen gaye wabishki mashkode bijiki kwe gaye gigu shigamu indigenous Ginyu and Dude Odawa Zagai Gunning and Donjaba. So what I said was, hello, my relatives. I have 3 spirit names, and they mean little ice woman, lightning, and buffalo woman. And I am from the Eagle clan, and my home reserve is Lakudere. I spend most of my time in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. That's where I work. It's where I lived for a long time, but I recently moved to Hudson, Wisconsin, just across the river to take care of my mom. So that's where I'm at, and I was thinking about what I was going to share tonight and thinking that it might be a little bit different than what people are used to, because I'm going to talk about, in Wellbriety, the philosophy says it's not so much what you're using, it's why you're using. And so people of all addiction are welcome in Wellbriety. And for myself, my recovery, my sobriety and my recovery have included 3 major recovery movements. Al-Anon, AA, really NA as well, and Wellbriety. And so I'd like to start my story. I know some people just kind of cut through the early stuff, but to me it's too important to talk about. If you're going to understand why I ended up wanting sobriety and working so hard to get it, you have to understand a little bit about who I am and where I come from. I was born to 2 alcoholic parents. I was the first child. My first experience with physical violence, I was still in the crib. I was watching my mom and dad were drunk, and my dad was beating up my mom, and I was crying. And he backhanded me and screamed at me to shut the F up. And that really affected me in a lot of ways at such a young age. I got the message to not cry, really big message there, and that instead of having to be afraid that the person who feeds me and changes me and takes care of me, my mom, might die, because that's what it would look like to me when I would watch him beat her up. Now I had to worry about, maybe in my little, tiny toddler mind, maybe I would die. And so I learned to try to be invisible. That was one of my coping mechanisms. Stuff my feelings, be invisible. Definitely be afraid of conflict. So I was 3 years old the first time that I got sexually abused. And what that taught me was, once again in my little toddler mind, it sexualized me and gave me the message that I was there for someone else's, to be the sexual receptacle. I mean, I wasn't thinking like that in my little kid mind, but that idea that I was going to get hurt no matter what. But if I did what they were telling me to do or wanting me to do, maybe I wouldn't die. So that was the mind kind of set of for me. And so as the oldest child, I felt this real deep sense of responsibility to try to protect my mom and my younger siblings, that I needed to somehow distract my dad or talk him down. And if I couldn't do it, then somehow it was my fault if they got hurt. And as much as it damaged me to get hurt, it hurt worse to watch them and to be powerless. So I would sacrifice myself if I had to. And as I got older and there was more people in our extended family who would sexually abuse kids, I started trying to protect my cousins too. And all the while, all of those feelings were, the experiences were going inside of me, and I couldn't let the feelings out because of what I learned so young. Just try to be invisible, don't cry, don't feel. Don't ever try to stand up for myself, or I would get really hurt then. So it set me up for a lot of things. I carried around a lot of shame. I carried around fear, terror, anxiety, depression, self-loathing, helplessness, hopelessness, all of those kinds of feelings. And when I was 11 years old, I was, my whole extended family on my dad's side, who we spent most of our time with, were all alcoholic. And I should say that, in my adult life, I did go back and find out that I had grandparents that were in boarding school. I had grandparents that horrific things happened to them. That, in doing research in my family, and going back, finding out that the person that I thought was the monster who started it all, my great-grandfather, I found out that when he was a little boy, his dad sold him to the loggers to use sexually so that they would give him alcohol, which was against the law to give to Indians back then. And so he was just a little boy that, nobody ever helped. So I just want to say that even before my generation, there are how many generations of people in our family went to boarding school or had other, atrocities happen to them where they learned don't talk, don't tell, don't feel. When you do that, you are set up to become an addict. If you don't have any other way to, all of our, the healthy ways in our culture, our ceremonies, our teachings, our traditions were outlawed. And so what was it, where do you turn? I'm not surprised that I come from this multi-generation of alcoholism and violence in our family. So I just want to say that I think that's a piece of it as well that I had to learn about, that I also carry with me. So that by the time I was 11 years old and everyone thought it was cute and funny when little kids drank in our family, I don't know why I hadn't drank enough to ever get drunk prior to that, but that was the first time that I really felt that out of control feeling. It was like all of the ugliness that I carried around inside of me was gone. And I went to this happy place, and I never wanted to come back. That very first time that I drank, I didn't stop until I blacked out, I got sick, I passed out, and the next day when I woke up, all I could think about was going back to the happy place. Because of the situation in my family with my parents, and especially my dad was a blackout drinker, and there was always lots of alcohol in our house, I could get away as a kid and all the way through my teen years with just taking booze from my parents' house, and they would never know. And it became a way for me to deal with all the trauma that happened in my house all the time that I was powerless over. So I'm not surprised that the happy place was so attractive to me, and that I drank as much as I could, as often as I could. And what I know now that I didn't know then is that when you're a child, your body's still developing. You know, your organs are still developing, your brain is still developing. That means that there are cells that are meant to double and quadruple and grow and grow. And alcohol is one of the kinds of drugs, the only other one that's like it is meth, that will kill the cell in your body. And so my kind of drinking was causing all kinds of damage to my organs in my body because of how much I was drinking and how often I was drinking. And so when I got to be about, well, I think I should probably talk about first that the older that I got, the more I was vulnerable to perpetrators. And I believe that those that prey on children, especially sexually, have a radar for kids that they can get away with it with. And for me, I was the kind of kid that if you started acting towards me in a way that was inappropriate or didn't feel good, did I run away or did I yell at them to leave me alone? No, because I'm dealing with it with what was embedded in my little child psyche, that you're going to get hurt no matter what, and you better do whatever they want. And as soon as someone started coming at me sexually, I just complied. I just did whatever they wanted me to because I was terrified. So the other perpetrators figured it out real fast, and so the more I drank, the more I even made myself more vulnerable. The more it happened to me, the more it happened to me, the more I drank. And at a certain point when I was in 12 and 13, 14 years old, I started trying to kill myself. I had 3 serious suicide attempts. I tried to overdose once. But my brother, I don't even know if he knows this, or if he remembers it, but he found me and he said, "What did you do?" And he was trying to help me, and he got me to throw up, and I didn't die, clearly. Another time I tried to hang myself with Christmas lights out the window, and another time, and one of my brothers found me then. And one night I was in the kitchen with a butcher knife, and I was going to slice my arms up, and my mom walked in, and I thought, I can't do this in front of my mom. So I was starting to feel really frustrated that I couldn't handle the world. It was too much. It was too painful. And then I got sick, physically sick. It was about when I was about 15 years old, 15 and 16 years old, I started having really bad pains in my abdomen. And then I started more and more to vomit blood, pee blood, and pass blood. And the doctors could not figure out what was wrong with me. Eventually, someone sent me down to the Mayo Clinic, and it was the first time that, well, the doctor shut the door and had everybody outside, and he asked me, "Do you drink alcohol?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He asked me how much and how often, and I told him, and he got really angry, and it scared me. My PTSD kind of kicked in, and I got really quiet, but he was yelling at me and telling me that I had destroyed my digestive system, that I was bleeding all over internally, and that I was going to die if I kept drinking. And when I left there, I remember thinking that I was trying other kinds of suicide and it wasn't working, so maybe this was the way I needed to do it. So I went straight back and I went right back to drinking. And I was gradually through that time, I lost weight. I was under 100 pounds. I looked really terrible. And one morning, it was a Sunday morning, I had been at a party the night before and I got raped at the party again. That was not my first time. And I was walking down the street trying to plan the perfect suicide because it was taking too long. The drinking myself to death wasn't fast enough. And I, for the first time in my entire life prior to that, I did not believe in God. I didn't feel God. That just wasn't something I thought about in my life. And as I was walking down the street, hungover, in the deepest, darkest place I had ever been, somebody started talking to me, and I knew that it was God, and they were saying, every single painful thing is getting at you through alcohol. If you get that out of your life, you're going to be okay. And I stopped and I was thinking about it. It was like my life was flashing before my eyes. And, everybody that had ever hurt me had been drunk. Every time I ever drank, I got hurt more. I was thinking, oh my gosh, that was true. And I had a brief, flicker inside of me, like this little flame of hope that maybe I wouldn't have to live like this. Maybe there was something else. I had a hope to maybe want to live. And so I reached out to one of my friends. She was my best friend. And like a couple years before that, her parents were alcoholics, but her parents were going to AA. And they took her to Alateen and she didn't want to go, so she brought me. So I had been to the Alano Club to go to Alateen, and I remember thinking that one time I went with her, I don't belong here. I did not feel like a kid. I did not relate to little kids. I felt old. And I did go to a couple Al-Anon meetings, though, after that. And I related to all the adults in that room, because when I thought about my parents' alcoholism, I thought, I know exactly what they were talking about. And it felt good to go to those meetings, but I wasn't thinking about my own use at the time. So when I reached out to that same best friend, we had another friend that had just gotten out of treatment. I hung out with all the other kids that were alcoholics and drug addicts, and even the kids who used the most used to look at me and say, I think you got a problem, Sharyl. I don't know why that didn't mean something more to me at the time, but so anyways, this friend that had just gotten out of treatment in a halfway house came. They did like a 12-step call, and I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't stop crying, and they tried to get me into treatment, but there wasn't any money back then, like insurance, or we hit a roadblock. But this friend said, the old school way of sobering up, alcohol and drugs, go to 90 meetings in 90 days and get a sponsor and do what they tell you to do. And I thought, all right, I was willing to do anything. And I said, I'll do it. And I knew where that Alano Club was, and I knew there was some nice people there. So I thought, I'll go. And I went, and it was kind of surprising at the time, because I thought of the place as a bunch of old people, but about the time that I went, there was more and more young people showing up, because we were doing a lot of drugs back in the 70s, and people were frying their brains and overdosing and ending up in treatment. And so I wasn't the only young person that was there, and that was a really important piece. When I see the movements now of young people coming together and supporting each other to go to meetings and hang out together and do do fun stuff together. That was the environment that I was really blessed with, and I didn't know how rare it was for back in the late 70s and early 80s. That I just was I took to it like, I was a sponge. I was soaking everything up, and I did 90 meetings in 90 days, and there was a lot of days where I did more than one meeting. I was really blessed that where I lived there was that Eleno club that had meetings all the time. And so all the other young people that were going to meetings all the time, we did everything together. I didn't have to worry about finding a new group of friends. And we were dealing with gut level stuff in our meetings. We were crying. We were dealing with all of our abuse issues and trauma stuff. And some people had a lot of unresolved grief issues. But we trusted each other, and we had fun. We went to like all the roundups we could. We loved Gopher State. We loved the Elkathon on New Year's. And I started building, I got a sponsor. I was doing what she told me to do. I was working steps. But here's a part that I think is important to understand, is that I was learning how to, AA and NA were teaching me how to not pick up alcohol and drugs. And they were teaching me how to start dealing with life in a healthier way that I would have never known about because I had no role models for that. But what it wasn't doing for me was, even though, I was a part of a group where we could really talk about gut level things, mainly what I was talking about was what was still going on in my house right then, because my mom had bottomed out. She was on her way. Oh, there it goes. I thought I got stuck for a minute. What I wasn't doing was dealing with the really deep I was a couple years sober. Go away to college. I had some big dreams for myself now that I was sober, and I thought, I'm going to live happily ever after. If I ever fall in love, it's going to be with the total opposite. And and so that was what was in my head, and away I went to college. What I was doing also during that time was realizing that I needed my culture really bad. I knew it in my bones. I knew that that was going to have to be a really big part of my healing. And so I was reaching out at that time, and I started going to sweats and going to ceremonies. And my spirituality was starting to really take off. I still was going to meetings all the time, going to school, and I ended up meeting a guy that, I had a list of stuff. If I ever was going to get in a relationship, the guy had to not drink alcohol or do drugs, had to not be violent, had to be faithful, had to have a job, had to be cultural, spiritual. So along comes this guy, and he's going to school to be a lawyer, super smart. He speaks fluent Ojibwe and Dakota language. And he tells me that he's not violent, and he's not, doesn't do alcohol or drugs. He's faithful, all this stuff. But he was lying, and I didn't know it. I couldn't see it. What I didn't know then, that I later learned, is that who you're attracted to and who's attracted to you is matches your woundedness, even if it's not in your conscious mind, and a lot of times it's not. So whatever my baggage was, that's what I was attracting. And he ended up being my dad on steroids. He was extremely violent. He was very much an alcoholic, drug addict. I, the faithfulness thing didn't even mean anything to me at the time. I would just wish he'd just go away and find somebody else. But when the first time that he got real violent to me was when the day that I found out I was pregnant with my oldest child. And he hauled off and punched me, and I had a black eye, and I was terrified because I saw the look in his eye, and I knew what he was. I had seen that look before. So I fled. I left school. I left my job. I loved school. I loved college. I was the director of the Indian Student Cultural Center. I loved my job. But I was terrified. And he was, his intelligence was tough because he stalked me in insidious ways. The first year I moved 10 times trying to get away from him, and he would always find me. I kept getting restraining orders. He would break them. The judges, police never did anything. Would continue to physically and sexually assault me. And I didn't know how to make it stop. And there was at the time, and I was still going to AA, hanging on to it for dear life, and still going to ceremonies. And I had spiritual people that were really afraid for me, so they made sure I got my name, and I had everything to help me be strong. And but a lady got a hold of me, and I always think of her as, I call her the angel lady. And I know this might not seem like, why is she talking about this stuff? Because it's not AA, but it's important to understand in my story and in my recovery. Because she called me and she said, there's somebody that's close to you that was telling me about you, and I think I can help you. And I had gone to talk therapy, a handful of times. It didn't do anything for me. And she goes, no, I am going to do something different and give it a chance. And so I went to see her, and she was this really different kind of therapist, because she wasn't saying, oh, how are you feeling, Cheryl? Or what do you want to talk about, Cheryl? She was doing weird stuff with me, and it would start pulling stuff out of way down deep inside of me. And I was processing. I got down to the level of that 2 and 3-year-old, and I was processing those things. And here's how I knew that something changed, something was different in me. Because prior to that, when I would get away from this guy, all he would have to do is talk somebody into giving him my number. And he would say, oh, this is Dr. So-and-so, and, I have real urgent medical news that she needs to hear. You don't have to tell me where she is. I know she's in hiding, but if you could just give me her number, we need to get her this information. And then people would give him my number, and as soon as he would call, and as soon as he would start screaming swear words and vile things at me, what was happening, and I didn't realize it, was my coping mechanisms of a 2 and 3-year-old would click. And I would be like, oh my God, I'm going to get hurt no matter what. I better do whatever he says, or I might die. And so he would say, tell me where you are, or let me in, or whatever. And I would just do it. And I would just be terrified and petrified. And then, the next morning I'm trying to crawl out the window in the basement to run away for the next time I ran away and find another place to hide. But what was changing when I was going to see this angel lady was that he would call on the phone, and I would just say, or actually, when he would call on the phone, I wouldn't even talk to him. All he'd have to do is get half a word out, and I would know it was him, and I'd hang it up. And if he showed up at my door somehow, if he found out where I was, because he would do that, and then he'd start kicking the door in and be screaming at me to open the door. Only when he would show up and do that, instead of letting him in, I would say, I know you have a warrant. I'm picking up the phone right now and dialing 911. If you don't want to go to jail, you better get out of here. What she was doing, because she told me this, she said, your problem is not this guy. Your problem is way, 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 way down deep inside of you. If we deal with that, he will have no power over you. And she was absolutely correct. But unfortunately, one of the things about domestic violence is that when the perpetrator realizes they don't have power anymore, is usually the most lethal time. And that was the case. When he realized he didn't have the power over me anymore, he waited until Christmas when he knew I would go to my family. And he broke in and he hid in the closet. I came home and I was so terrified. And for 3 days he held me hostage. And he tried to kill me, he strangled me, he sexually assaulted me. And when he left, he took our baby and he said, if you call the police, I will take her to White Earth and I will hide her out and you will never see her again. I was laying on the floor bleeding and crying, and he had taken off with the baby, and the phone rang. And it was the angel lady, because she would check on me every now and then because she knew I was in a not safe, kind of situation. And I couldn't talk. I was just like, and she knew, so she called the police, and they came and took me to the hospital, and they set up a sting kind of a thing where I knew he'd come back because he couldn't handle taking care of a baby. He just did that so I wouldn't call the police. So they set something up, and he got arrested. I stayed in a shelter until the trial. They made an exception for me because normally you only get to stay for 30 days, but I stayed almost 6 months until the trial. And he went to prison for a year. That's all, just a year. But I was so grateful that I had a year to go get my life together. And that therapist, when she told me that, you attract your level of woundedness, I thought, oh my gosh, I have work to do on myself. And I kept going to AA, I kept going to NA, kept going to ceremonies, and I started jingle dress dancing. And I worked on myself before I ever got in another relationship. I did meet someone. I met someone in AA, and we ended up getting married. We had a great big family, 10 kids all together, and I thought my life was, I thought I was living in a dream because it was so wonderful, but I worked really hard. I still was going to meetings. I had a sponsor. I was a sponsor. I was working steps. And I would say about 10 years down the road, 10, 15 years down the road, some things started to happen. My kids were becoming teenagers, and I had this idea in my head that I wanted to keep my kids safe like no one kept me safe when I was a kid. That if I had any role in this world, my role was to make sure that the things that happened to me never happened to my kids. So I'm thinking, because here we are raising kids in an alcohol, drug-free, violence-free home, they're never going to use, they're never going to have a problem, we're all going to live happily ever after. I was young, I was naive, and I was very hopeful. So when my kids started to use, some of them started getting in relationships with boys. Some of the times they were violent. I was going crazy because I felt like I'm failing my job. I'm not keeping my kids safe. And about that time, my husband, that I had nothing but love and respect for, he had some major losses in his life. He had 2 sons from his first marriage that died, and his mom died. And he started acting real weird. What I didn't know was that in the beginning was he developed a gambling problem. And people told me that how he was acting was just like how he used to act when he was drinking. And I never knew him when he was drinking. But he went from the best father in the world, someone who would never be violent, I had nothing but respect and love for, became mean and snaky and would yell and swear at the kids, and started stealing, the money out of the bank account, started stealing money from the kids. And so I was still going to AA, but about that time I figured out I had to start going to Al-Anon again. That I needed to figure out how to deal with the other alcoholics and addicts in my life. And sadly, that was looking like some of my kids were going down the same road. And here was my husband with an addiction that looked just like alcohol or drugs to me, at least what we were seeing. And so I went back to Al-Anon, and that was keeping me sane, because there were times when I would just cry, and think, I don't know if I can make it through one more day. It was hard. It was hard. And I ended up having to give my husband an ultimatum about he had to give up the gambling or his family, because he was taking us down with him. We were losing everything. We were losing our beautiful home. And and because of him stealing money from the kids, I thought we could end up with child protection involved. And he chose the gambling. I waited till after Christmas, gave him the ultimatum. He gave me the finger and walked out the door. And I can't tell you the despair that I felt at that time. But I called my sponsor. I went to meetings. I never gave up on that. There was a point, because right after this happened, I was in a really bad car accident, and they had to do reconstructive surgery on my shoulder. My husband and I had been doing foster care. I did foster care for about 21 years because I wanted to give a safe place to little children that I never had. And so I was in this car accident. They did the surgery while I was in the hospital for that. They found out that I had cancer, and I had 3 surgeries to remove the cancer. And because of that, the head of child protection, who didn't like me because I made him do right by kids, they needed a surgery, and he said no, I would appeal it or get an attorney, and so he didn't like me anyways. But he took our foster kids, and I had wanted to adopt them. I loved them. I had cared for them for years. And it's like the loss of my marriage. My kids were using. Some of them were being suicidal at that time. And they were taking our foster kids, and I couldn't work. I was losing the house. The bank foreclosed on the house. And I ended up I'm almost 20 years sober about this time. Almost about maybe 16, 17 years sober. And I'm walking down the road, trying to, my arms all, from the surgery, is all in a sling and everything. My husband stole all the cars and hawked them for gambling money. There was no car. My kids are all in school. And I'm hitchhiking, trying to get into town to go to the liquor store. And nobody would pick me up. I was so mad. I was like, I'm a little tiny woman, with an arm in a sling. Why are you not giving, I'm not scary. Give me a ride. And nobody would give me a ride. I turned around. I was bawling and stomping down the driveway into the house, and the phone started ringing. This was back before there was cell phones. And I went and I answered the phone, and it was my friends in Belgium. And it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and a husband and wife, and they woke up out of their sleep, and they thought something terrible is wrong with Sharyl. So they called me. I said, what are you guys doing calling me? It's like 2 o'clock in the morning where you are?" And they go, "We woke up and we knew something was wrong." "What's wrong?" And I knew that was Creator. That was Creator telling me I can't do that. I can't drink. I would die. I know it. I have no doubt in my mind. Picking up alcohol or drugs again is a suicide. And then I knew it in that moment. I ended up deciding I can, I went to a lot of meetings and said, I'm going to start over. I got a chance to get a job and a place to live in White Earth. I moved from Bemidji to White Earth, and I got a job at CD, and they started training me to be a counselor. I had a place to live, started my life over again. I feel really blessed about that. Life still wasn't easy, and I had a really good women's AA in Detroit Lakes and a really good Al-Anon in Detroit Lakes. There was me, and there was only 2 of us natives at Al-Anon, and my brother Joe and I were the only natives at Al-Anon, but boy, did we so related to each other. All our kids were teenagers. They were all using. Scary stuff was happening with our kids, but we really supported each other and saved my sanity. And once again, AA and NA was saving my life. Right about that time, my brother Marlon calls me, and he says, "Hey, if you call this number, you can get a free book sent to you. It's called The Red Road to Wellbriety. For a short time, they're giving them away for free if you call, and they'll mail them to you." He said, "You got to read this book, sis." So I called. They sent me out a book. I got it. I stayed up all night. I read that book from front to back in one sitting, and every single thing in there I related to. So about this time, I'm 20 years sober. I go to meetings. I got a sponsor. I am a sponsor. I'm working steps. And when I did Medicine Wheel 12 steps the first time, blew me away. It was like I didn't even know what these steps were about till I did it this way. It was like a whole new awakening in my life, wellbriety. Every chance I got, I would go to a training, or I would go to thankfully to Marlon, he brought in the 7 trainings to our reservation, White Earth at the time, and I got to go. I got to meet Don. I got to meet all kinds of really amazing people, and a lot of spiritual things were starting to happen to me at that time as well. I was starting to get an empty nest, and I was starting to have dreams. Like I was being told to do some things in my dreams, and it was scaring me because I thought, I'm not worthy. I don't know why I'm having these dreams. People were starting to come to me just because I had been sober for a long time, and they wanted me to do spiritual things, and I was like, you guys don't know who you're talking to. I'm just me, I don't know how to do that stuff. But I was having these dreams all the time at night, and I'd wake up every night between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning with these dreams saying, telling me to do this stuff, and I was scared. So finally this one night, I got woken up like somebody grabbed me by my front of my shirt and yanked me up out of bed, and I heard really loud, "Just do it!" And I started, and right then, every picture in my whole room, all around the whole room, I had a lot of stuff hanging on the walls, boom, crashed down on the, and I said, okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but you're going to have to send me teachers. And whatever, and I knew it was Creator. I was like, I'll give myself to you. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. But you have to send me teachers because I don't know how to do things. Within a couple months, a whole bunch of things started happening. One of them was that somebody called me and said, "Hey, there's White Bison and Wellbriety's got something going on over in Minneapolis." And I was like, "Oh, what's it about?" And they said, "I don't know, but it's happening. You should come." And so I had been on a fast praying. really hard. And some of the messages I got on my fast were, "Are you sure you?" Because I was saying, I'll do whatever you want me to do, even if it's hard. But please show me, guide me, give me awarenesses. And the message that was coming is, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure." And so I come off the fast, and somebody's calling me saying, "Oh, go to this Wellbriety thing." So I went over there, and it had already, I didn't miss much, but it was getting started. And here was Don Koyas up at the front at the microphone, and he was saying, "Welcome to the Forgiving the Unforgivable conference." And I was standing in the back, and as soon as he said that, I knew what they were talking about. And I thought, how do you forgive that stuff? I was even kind of mad. I was like, don't even talk to me about that. I don't even know how you can think about forgiving that. I knew what they were talking about. Things like I had lived through when I was a little bitty tiny kid. But I trusted those people. I trusted every time I ever went around anything with Wellbriety, huge healing, huge growing happened for me. So I committed to sticking around, and in the course of the next 3 days, they taught me some things that were really important for me. And they said that if you don't even have to say the word forgive, set it aside. Maybe you just want to say let go. And then they taught me about some things that, like, when you forgiveness, it isn't meaning that what they did was okay. It doesn't mean you have to have them in your life. In fact, you should have healthy boundaries. And it doesn't mean they shouldn't still be held accountable. If they're still hurting people, if there's a legal way that, they need to be held accountable, they should. All it means is that you're not going to carry hatred, anger, and resentment inside of you. Because if you do, you won't know it. It will be subconscious, but it will be eating away at you. It will be affecting every relationship you have with all the people that you love the most. It will be keeping you from having the best relationships. And it clicked in my mind because I had a mother-in-law who, she had a husband who was constantly, would take all his paycheck. They had 11 kids, and he would blow the paycheck at the bar. He'd run around with other women. He'd be violent. She would just take it and take it and take it and smile and smile and smile and pretend like nothing was wrong. And then, 30 years down the road, he sobered up. And by that time, she was mean and twisted and angry, and she started trying to kill him. And she was mean to everybody, even her kid. She'd even go off on her kids. And when they said that, I thought, oh my gosh, I know what that is. I think I've seen that, and I don't want to turn into that. So I thought, okay, so I'm listening. And then they said, we're in creation, in the way that us as Native people believe, we're no better or less than any other part of creation, than a blade of grass or an insect or another animal or a bird or whatever. We're all equal. And so you have to know nature's our greatest teacher. So they gave this example of, say, you got a pack of wolves, one fall, that goes nutty. And they kill way too many deer. They can't even eat them all. They just massacre all the deer. So that winter, and you got to know, the teachings in Wellbriety talk about balance, polarity, living in harmony, all that stuff that you learn from natural laws. So that winter, because they slaughtered all the deer, there wasn't enough food for the wolves, and a bunch of the wolves died of starvation. So the next spring, because there wasn't so many wolves, a lot more baby fawns, baby deer survived. So then the deer population came back, and then gradually, because the deer population came back and there was more food, then the wolf population came back, and Creator or nature restored the balance. It always happens. She will, if something's throwing things out of harmony, and I think about this at this time right now when we're messing with our mother, and the water and the air and the soil, we have to really watch out, because it's true. She will always take care of it somehow and bring everything back into balance. So they said, in the same way, if a human being is out there hurting other human beings, you have to know that it's all the same natural laws. And they will, there will be something that they have to pay for. It will be righted. And you don't have to be the judge, and you don't have to be the jury. You might not get to know what that looks like when it gets the wrong gets brought to right, but just trust that it will. And know that you just don't want to be carrying around hatred, anger, and resentment. And so I took it to heart, and I went and I forgave my perpetrators. The hardest one was my dad. But I had a blessing at the very end, because when he found out he was dying, he reached out to me. And he said, I don't deserve anything from any of you. But if, I have a little bit of time before I die, and I'm going to set the alcohol aside and try to make it right. And I'm so sorry for what I did. And then he said two things to me I never thought I'd ever hear from my dad, ever. He said, I love you. I had never said that before. And I'm proud of you. He had never said that before. And it made me think that at that point in time, I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. But I gave him a chance, and he lived in another state, so it wasn't too scary. But I ended up going and helping him when he died, so that he could die at home like he wanted to. And I had a spiritual experience happen when he died, because when I was weak and fragile, vulnerable, and naked, when I was a tiny child, he hurt me in the most unspeakable ways. And here he was, wasted away with cancer, tiny shell of a man, a bag of bones. And I had to wash him. I had to, wipe him when he went to the bathroom. And and it just came to me on that last night when he was dying, that here he is, weak and fragile and vulnerable and naked. And instead of hurting him, I give him forgiveness. I've given him love. And there was like this light that burst in the room. And I heard Creator again say to me, always, 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 love and forgiveness are the answer. And right after that, my dad took his last breath. And there's something that clicked inside of me in that moment. And I feel like it was the final piece, because after that, I went on to be able to experience being able to give myself fully to other people and love them and let them love me. And Wellbriety and the Medicine Wheel 12 steps and all the teachings that I got from Wellbriety taught me that. So I want to say, and I have 40 years of sobriety this year. In July, it will be 41 if I make it. I've never stopped going to meetings. I've never stopped having a sponsor. I have a beautiful, lovely sponsor named Linda over in Michigan. I love her to pieces. And we co-sponsor each other because she has 50 years of sobriety. And I have sponsors. I love my meetings. I still go to Al-Anon. I still go to AANA and Wellbriety. And I will never stop as long as I'm able to. And now that we can do these kind of Zoom and phone conference meetings, even if I'm in a wheelchair, I can still go to meetings. It's really cool. So I think at this time that we're going through right now, it's a really hard time. I have been so terrified once again that my children and my grandchildren could get hurt, and I'm powerless. And I've had to use my meetings and my steps to deal with that. I've been terrified. It triggered me. It triggered my PTSD. And it was Al-Anon. It was at an Al-Anon meeting that I, a few days, last Tuesday, where the awareness came to me, what was going on with me, why I was having insomnia, and that I needed to cry and talk about it, and reached out to my sponsor, and this stuff works. And I guess I can't tell anybody else how to do it, but this is what worked for me. And I love the program. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love Al-Anon. I love NA. And I love, love, love Wellbriety. And to see all of you people getting involved, and it just warms my heart, because I feel like our people are going to be okay, because we have ways to heal and we have ways to learn how to live that are beautiful. And picking up our culture is just a beautiful thing. And I want to thank all of you for coming on and listening to me. And I feel really privileged and honored to know a lot of you. And I send love out to everybody. And I wish you all sobriety, wellbriety, peace, serenity, and happiness. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Love you guys. You're awesome.